The emergency alert tone had barely begun its upward shriek when every screen on Earth flickered to life, showing the trembling face of a middle-aged man named Bob as he clutched a lunchbox to his chest like it was sacred treasure. Behind him, an alien the color of radioactive mint leaned into the frame and shouted at galactic volume that Earth had exactly 1 hour to send the human who only brings results, or Bob would be launched into deep space wearing nothing but his anxiety. This would have been horrifying if the alien had not immediately tripped over a cable on live broadcast, sending a metallic clang echoing across billions of screens while Bob whispered sorry out of pure habit. For 5 seconds the world stood frozen, half terrified, half confused whether this was a cosmic threat or an accidental comedy. That was the hook, the moment humanity realized they were so doomed that even their hostage situation had slapstick energy. As the broadcast stabilized, the alien straightened with theatrical indignation, smoothing his shimmering cape as if dignity could be patched back into place. He declared himself Celtrian of the Vesmora Empire, supreme entertainer of 17 star clusters, and demanded Earth surrender its most effective human. The phrase most effective caused a brief but heated global debate as billions of people looked around at each other in existential disappointment. Meanwhile, Bob whimpered, accidentally dropping his lunchbox, which popped open to reveal a sandwich, a sticky note that read "Don't forget you're worth something," and a small packet of tissues. Aliens watching across the galaxy flooded the live-stream chat with emotional reactions ranging from applause to comments suggesting Bob resembled a frightened pudding. Earth's leaders scrambled into emergency conference mode so quickly that entire governments forgot their coffee mugs in hallways. Representatives from every nation argued not about Celtrian's threat but about the definition of effective. The military proposed soldiers, scientists lobbied for researchers, athletes flexed in case physical superiority was required, and one overly confident motivational speaker volunteered himself because he once convinced 12 people to buy a self-improvement calendar. The chaos grew until someone in the Global Council whispered a name that silenced the entire virtual chamber. Kale Ren. A man with a reputation so clean it was nearly suspicious. Kale was known for solving impossible problems with alarming calm, like the time he rerouted a collapsing dam using only a toolkit, a broken radio, and a disgruntled goose. He was the person called when nations failed, when technology malfunctioned, and when someone very important lost their password but refused to admit it. Kale was brilliant, efficient, and famously uninterested in praise. Earth agreed almost instantly that he was the one to send, which Kale found out when 6 officials barged into his apartment carrying a launch schedule, a binder of alien etiquette guidelines, and a cake that read "Good luck having zero choice in this." Kale sat at his kitchen table staring at the cake while officials hurriedly explained the situation. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable except for a slight narrowing of his eyes when he saw the live stream replay. Bob was sobbing quietly in the corner of the alien studio, while Celtrian yelled at a camera drone for capturing his bad side. Kale exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing onto his shoulders. The officials insisted Earth needed him because failure meant galactic embarrassment, and the loss of one innocent life. Kale finally nodded, stood up, and asked whether he at least had time to pack. They replied with an apologetic no as they ushered him out the door. Within minutes, Kale found himself suited in an emergency space jumpsuit, strapped inside a hastily repurposed research shuttle. Engineers outside the launch bay yelled last-minute instructions with the panicked enthusiasm of people who had not slept for 30 hours. Kale reviewed an absurd document titled Hostage Negotiation Waiver for Extraterrestrial Encounters, which required him to initial sections acknowledging the possibility of planetary vaporization, mandatory audience participation, and alien etiquette rules such as avoiding direct compliments about tentacle symmetry. As the countdown began, Kale closed his eyes and centered himself. He recalled the last words spoken to him before launch, a trembling plea from an Earth official who gripped his arm with desperate hope. Save him. Whatever it takes. Kale gave a quiet promise that he did not fail, though the methods he used did not always make sense to anyone else. The engines roared and the shuttle ascended with a violent shudder, shooting through the atmosphere like a metal hope hurled at the stars. While Kale's shuttle cut through space, Celtrian continued broadcasting Bob to the galaxy, holding him in a glittering cage shaped suspiciously like a decorative lamp. Zeltrian paced dramatically, shouting that failure to meet the deadline would result in Bob being thrown into the vacuum of silence, which sounded poetic until Bob asked whether that was just a fancy term for outer space, and Zeltrian told him to please stop ruining the dramatic tension. Back on Earth, billions watched anxiously. People clung to screens in homes, offices, schools, and parks. The world held its breath as the shuttle approached the Vesmora megaship, a colossal structure glowing with neon patterns that resembled a disco ball having an identity crisis. Cale observed it quietly, noting structural details, energy signatures, and atmospheric readings with methodical precision. Yet even with all his rational focus, he understood the gravity of the moment. This was not a simple rescue. It was a negotiation with an alien obsessed with entertainment ratings, a being whose power depended on viewership spikes and dramatic spectacle. A misstep could end Bob, damage Earth's reputation, or even spark interstellar conflict. The shuttle docked with a resounding clang, and Cale stepped inside the alien craft. A camera drone immediately zoomed into his face, broadcasting him live to trillions. Zeltrian appeared with a flourish, clearly thrilled at the entrance of Earth's chosen hero. He welcomed Cale with exaggerated excitement, while Bob called out from his glitter cage, his voice trembling with relief and fear. Cale lifted a hand in acknowledgement, his expression steady and calm. Zeltrian announced that the real show was about to begin. The alien audience roared with anticipation, scrolling comments so fast they blurred into a river of chaotic enthusiasm. Cale stood tall, assessing the situation with unwavering resolve. He had entered a world where danger and entertainment were intertwined, and where saving Bob required more than skill. It required navigating a culture that valued spectacle above sanity. As the camera drone circled, Zeltrian grinned with predatory delight, declaring that Earth had sent its most effective human. Cale met his gaze without flinching, ready to begin whatever challenge lay ahead, knowing the entire galaxy was watching. Cale had assumed that an alien megaship would feel metallic, cold, and militaristic, but the moment he stepped through the docking hatch, he found himself in what looked suspiciously like a chaotic television backstage area. Holographic set pieces floated past on rail systems, alien makeup artists with 6 hands yelled at one another over misplaced eyeliner drones, and a giant creature shaped like a bubble tea cup waddled by complaining about being underpaid. Zeltrian strutted ahead, cape dragging on the floor, barking orders with the confidence of someone who believed the universe operated according to his personal script. Cale followed silently, taking everything in while drones zipped around him, broadcasting every detail to the galaxy. The aliens loved this new character, the quiet human whose stern expression suggested he had already solved 6 problems while walking. Zeltrian stopped abruptly, causing an alien assistant to crash into him. With dramatic flair, he spread his arms and announced that Cale had officially entered the planet of performers, the mobile production capital of the Vesmora Empire. Cale observed the surroundings with clinical interest. Every corridor glowed with shifting neon patterns that changed color based on audience engagement. When engagement dipped, the lights dimmed. When it rose, the entire hallway shimmered like a rainbow having a good day. It was an environment powered by attention itself, where cameras were more sacred than oxygen. Cale said nothing, but he quietly cataloged power sources, emergency exits, air filtration systems, and structural weak points. Old habits never faded. They entered the center of the ship, a massive control chamber filled with hundreds of screens displaying live audience reactions. Comments scrolled endlessly, some cheering for Cale, some teasing Bob, and others asking whether Earth offered discount subscriptions. Bob was visible on a far screen, still in his glitter cage, giving a small, awkward wave to the camera. The alien audience erupted in delight at his timid politeness, finding it adorable in a way that made Cale deeply uncomfortable on Bob's behalf. Zeltrian beamed proudly, explaining that Bob was trending across 9 galaxies and had reached the adorable hostage category reserved for beings who melted hearts while trembling. Cale kept his voice steady as he asked why they had taken Bob. Zeltrian placed a glowing hand over his chest in exaggerated suffering, insisting it was not about cruelty but ratings. His last season had underperformed, The Galactic Council was threatening to cut his broadcast budget, and he needed something fresh. Humans were emotionally dramatic, prone to panic, and very expressive, which made them perfect for audience retention. Kale almost corrected him but decided that debating human behavior on live broadcast was unnecessary. Instead, he asked what exactly Zeltrian wanted from him. Zeltrian spun around dramatically, gesturing to a massive digital list that appeared in midair. It was a schedule filled with challenges, each one more absurd than the last. Kale was expected to complete them live, under time pressure, with no explanations allowed. Zeltrian explained that Kale's failure would not only reduce ratings but potentially collapse the ship-wide energy grid since it fed on audience attention. Kale stared at the list, reading tasks such as rebuild a quantum stabilizer using only kitchen utensils or prevent a meltdown in the atmospheric scrubbers while wearing joke shoes that squeaked loudly every step. The alien audience adored the concept, reacting with waves of excitement. Kale maintained his calm. If the ship truly ran on audience engagement, then Zeltrian required constant spectacle to survive politically. Kale noticed how the lights flickered when viewer reactions slowed, how Zeltrian winced at every dip, and how every drone responded instantly to spikes in viewership. This entire world operated like a fragile performance ecosystem. A misstep here could trigger consequences far greater than embarrassment. Kale agreed to participate, but only if Bob remained unharmed. Zeltrian assured him that Bob was essential to the broadcast now, and was safer inside his glitter cage than any executive intern on this ship. The way he said it made Kale slightly worried about the interns. The first challenge began immediately. Kale was escorted to a malfunctioning tech bay filled with smoking tubes, sparking wires, and a loud buzzer that blared whenever the audience wanted heightened tension. Zeltrian announced that the quantum coolant system had collapsed, and that Kale had only minutes to restore it using whatever he found in the room. Kale calmly scanned the area and immediately noticed the system was not malfunctioning but deliberately sabotaged, wires sliced in precise patterns. Someone on this ship wanted failure. Kale worked quickly, ignoring the drones hovering close to his face. He repurposed a metal tray to bypass a broken circuit, rerouted the coolant flow through leftover beverage tubing, and patched a core crack using sealant foam that had been mislabeled as frosting. The system stabilized in seconds, impressing even the drones, which began circling him with celebratory jingles. Zeltrian was thrilled by the unexpected smoothness of the solution, though the audience seemed slightly disappointed that there had been no big explosion. The alien entertainer recovered quickly, declaring Kale a natural performer with comedic timing known as accidental suspense. Kale did not respond. He was analyzing the sabotage marks he had seen. Whoever made them knew the ship well. This was no amateur. As the day continued, Zeltrian subjected Kale to increasingly ridiculous challenges. In one, Kale had to solve a logic puzzle while balancing on a rotating platform. In another, he was placed inside a zero-gravity chamber filled with floating rubber spheres that squeaked every time he touched one. Each challenge seemed designed to make Kale look foolish, yet Kale solved every scenario with unnerving efficiency, rarely breaking a sweat. What Zeltrian did not anticipate was that the audience loved it. His competence became entertainment. Comments flooded in celebrating Earth's unshakable human. While Kale cultivated intergalactic fame, Bob unexpectedly became a rising star. Bored and hungry, Bob began offering life advice through the bars of his cage, comforting anxious alien viewers and giving practical tips on filing taxes. His gentle manner became a soothing contrast to the chaos, and aliens adored him even more. Kale saw this from a distance, and felt a strange mixture of relief and concern. Popularity here was dangerous. Fame was fuel, but also a trap. Late in the cycle, while Zeltrian was distracted with ratings data, Kale slipped into a maintenance corridor to examine something that had troubled him. He had seen a shadowy figure lurking behind hollow panels during one of the challenges. Now he found evidence of tampering all over the ship. Someone was not just sabotaging the systems, but targeting the broadcast itself. Kale knelt to inspect scorch marks on a panel when he felt a shift in the air behind him. He turned sharply, catching only the briefest silhouette of a tall alien slipping into the vents. Kale stood slowly, realizing there was a bigger threat aboard the megaship. Zeltrian believed he was running the show, but someone else was pulling strings from the darkness. Someone who wanted the broadcast to fail. Someone who wanted chaos. And Kale was certain of one thing. Whatever this threat was, it was watching him now. The next cycle on the alien megaship began with the familiar blare of the attention sirens, which were essentially loud horns that blasted every time audience engagement dipped. Kale woke to the sound in a small guest chamber that Zeltrian insisted was luxurious, though it felt more like an energetic closet filled with glowing cushions that hummed emotionally whenever he sat on them. He stood, stretched, and mentally prepared himself for another day inside a floating drama machine. The discovery from the previous night weighed heavily on his mind. Someone aboard the ship was deliberately sabotaging key systems, and it was not for entertainment value. There was precision behind the attacks, the kind that suggested sabotage with political intent. Zeltrian might be oblivious, but Kale was not. When Kale stepped out into the main corridor, Zeltrian was already in a frenzy. Assistants scrambled around him with holographic charts showing fluctuating audience metrics. Zeltrian was shouting that his rivals were spreading rumors that his ratings were inflated by Earthling novelty, and that he had become dependent on human panic to stay relevant. He dramatically pointed to a graph showing a dip in viewer retention during the hour Kale disappeared to investigate. Kale listened quietly, noting the pattern. The saboteur struck most often when Zeltrian was distracted or vulnerable. As Kale watched the commotion, one of the drones suddenly sparked violently and crashed into the floor. The lights flickered. Alarms sounded. Zeltrian shrieked, accusing his staff of incompetence. But Kale recognized the same precise marks he had seen on other damaged panels. It was not incompetence. It was sabotage. Zeltrian, determined to overshadow the chaos with spectacle, announced a new challenge for Kale. A wave of drones surrounded him, projecting a holographic display of a life support failure unfolding in real time. If Kale did not fix the malfunction, half the ship would lose breathable air. The audience went wild. Kale, however, saw through it immediately. He studied the readings and realized the system was not failing naturally. It was being forced into overload by internal data tampering. Someone was creating crises to amplify Zeltrian's desperation. Kale moved quickly through the maintenance network, shutting down false alarms and stabilizing the flow. But midway through the process, he noticed a secondary stream of corrupted commands routed from deep within the restricted engine sectors. He tried to trace it, but the sender erased their tracks with professional precision. When he returned to the studio floor, he found Zeltrian in the middle of an argument with a council representative who had appeared via hologram, accusing him of unethical broadcasting. Zeltrian protested loudly, insisting everything was genuine and emotionally engaging. Kale observed that the representative seemed unusually satisfied by Zeltrian's panic. This entire political structure revolved around ratings, and Zeltrian was on the verge of losing everything. Kale began to realize that the sabotage was not just an attempt to destroy the broadcast. It was an attempt to unseat Zeltrian from power. Meanwhile, Bob had unknowingly become a critical part of the unfolding drama. His popularity had grown uncontrollably overnight. In his glitter cage, he had begun offering intergalactic cooking tips, telling stories about losing his job on Earth, and explaining the concept of budgeting. Aliens were mesmerized. They adored his gentle voice, his nervous humor, and his painfully honest life anecdotes. Bob was inspirational without meaning to be, and his rising influence was starting to overshadow Zeltrian. Kale saw this from across the studio and knew it put Bob at risk. A power struggle was unfolding, and Bob was becoming a piece on the board. During a break in the scheduled challenges, Kale finally confronted Zeltrian about the sabotage. Zeltrian, initially offended at the implication that anything could be wrong in his perfect production kingdom, eventually confessed that he suspected his rival Vorkan had been plotting against him for cycles. Vorkan, known for running horror-based broadcasts that specialized in fear-driven viewership spikes, had long coveted Zeltrian's position. Kale listened carefully. Everything aligned with the theory that Vorkan was orchestrating a takeover. Zeltrian insisted he could handle competition and that all entertainers faced political danger, but Kale demanded access to restricted engineering systems to investigate further. Reluctantly, Zeltrian agreed, but only if Kale performed one more challenge first to boost ratings. Kale accepted for Bob's sake. A rise in ratings meant the ship had more energy, which made it harder for saboteurs to manipulate the grid. The next challenge was a staged emergency in the waste processing core, where suction vents were malfunctioning and risking a catastrophic implosion. Kale arrived to find technicians panicking on camera, dramatically throwing themselves against walls for effect. Kale ignored the theatrics and checked the system. This time, however, the damage was severe and real. Components had been replaced with faulty parts. Kale worked quickly, stabilizing pressure levels and shutting off dangerous currents. While doing so, he caught movement in the corner of his eye. He turned sharply and caught a glimpse of the same tall figure he had seen before, slipping through a service hatch. Kale sprinted toward it, but the hatch sealed itself a second before he reached it. By the time he forced it open, the intruder was gone. Back in the studio, Zeltrian was preparing a dramatic speech about triumph and perseverance when Kale returned. But before he could begin, alarms blared across the entire ship. The glitter cage around Bob started flashing red. The audience screamed with excitement, mistaking it for another stunt. Kale rushed forward and scanned the readings. His worst suspicion was confirmed. The cage was connected to an explosive failsafe. Not only that, but the trigger was tied directly to audience engagement levels. If ratings dropped below a certain point, the cage would detonate. Kale confronted Zeltrian, who swore he had no knowledge of such a mechanism. Zeltrian collapsed onto his knees in horror when Kale explained the design. It was sabotage with the cruelest intent. If Bob died on Zeltrian's broadcast, Vorkin could destroy him socially and professionally. Zeltrian begged Kale for help, not out of concern for Bob alone but because his entire existence hung in the balance. Kale looked at Bob, who was desperately trying to smile through his terror to keep viewers engaged. It was clear that Bob understood the stakes. Kale stepped back, piecing together the full picture. Vorkin had infiltrated the megaship, manipulated systems to create chaos, turned the broadcast into a death trap, and positioned himself to replace Zeltrian if the disaster unfolded publicly. But the plan relied on one assumption, that Kale would fail. Kale looked up at the nearest camera drone, his expression sharpening with resolve. Someone wanted a show. He was going to give them one. Kale stood in the studio center, the glitter cage behind him pulsing with dangerous red light that cast trembling reflections across the metallic floors. Bob clung to the bars, offering awkward encouragement to the galaxy with a shaky smile, trying desperately to keep viewer engagement from dipping. The alien audience adored him, but love alone could not override sabotage woven into the ship's infrastructure. Zeltrian paced wildly, unable to focus, muttering that his career was disintegrating in real time. Kale lifted a hand and steadied the frantic alien with a simple look. It was enough. Zeltrian froze, watching Kale with a mix of terror and hope, as if the human had become the only fixed point in a spiraling world. Kale told him calmly that the only way out was to outperform the saboteur and give the audience something so gripping they would refuse to look away. If the ratings stayed high, Bob stayed alive. If the ratings soared, Kale might be able to expose the threat without the entire ship descending into panic. Zeltrian nodded rapidly, his cape fluttering with every anxious breath. A plan was forming, even if improvisation was the foundation. Kale approached Bob's cage, quietly reassuring him that they would get through this. Bob nodded, though his trembling made it clear he was a breath away from breaking down. Aliens watching from across the galaxy sent supportive comments, reacting emotionally to the earnest human connection. Kale noticed the engagement numbers rise a few points. That meant one thing. Emotional authenticity worked. He stepped back and told Zeltrian that for once, the spectacle needed to be real. Zeltrian pressed a hand dramatically against his chest, insisting that authenticity was his specialty, which was almost convincing if Kale ignored the fact that everything Zeltrian had done so far involved staged chaos, glitter explosions, and random backstage screaming. The first step in their plan was pairing Kale and Bob as a duo in a way that would elevate the charm that Bob naturally radiated. They proposed a segment where Kale and Bob answered challenges together, mixing competence with comedic panic. Zeltrian hesitated at the idea of giving Bob more screen time, because Bob was unintentionally stealing the show, but Kale assured him that this was exactly why it would keep ratings high enough to protect the cage. Bob was moved out of his glitter prison temporarily and fitted with a harness that allowed drones to hover him safely near Kale while still broadcasting him clearly. The audience immediately erupted in excitement at the reunion. Zeltrian watched the numbers climbing with visible relief. Their first duo challenge was introduced as an obstacle course that simulated a collapsing asteroid mining rig. Kale recognized immediately that the course was designed to be difficult but not fatal, though he suspected the saboteur might have tampered with it. Bob, attached to his hovering harness like a nervous balloon, flailed every time the drones adjusted his position. Kale guided him calmly through the first section, lifting fallen beams with ease and calculating safe paths faster than the drones could announce them. Bob mostly screamed, apologized to inanimate objects, and occasionally offered heartfelt commentary about facing fears. The alien audience loved him even more. When Kale solved a puzzle mid-run by silently rewiring a control panel, Bob proudly announced that he once fixed a coffee machine by hitting it, which somehow went viral instantly among viewers who found his honesty refreshing. As they continued, Kale noticed subtle malfunctions occurring. Platforms rose too fast, mechanical arms swung with dangerous force, and simulated debris shot out unexpectedly. These errors were too frequent to be accidental. Someone was increasing the difficulty to lethal levels. Kale adapted instantly, redirecting Bob, dodging hazards, and completing tasks in creative ways. At one point, a panel snapped loose above them. Kale grabbed Bob mid-air and swung them both out of danger. The camera drones captured everything, feeding the galaxy an intense mix of suspense, skill, and comedic terror. Engagement soared to unprecedented heights. After the obstacle course concluded, Zeltrian practically burst into celebratory tears upon seeing the stable viewer numbers. But the relief was short-lived. A system alert flickered across the control screens. Bob's original cage had been remotely accessed, and the failsafe timer was counting down. Kale realized that keeping the ratings high was only buying time. He needed to dismantle the sabotage at its source. Bob was quickly secured inside a safer transparent enclosure near the main studio so he could remain visible to the audience, who now considered him a beloved emotional support human. Zeltrian clutched his head dramatically, wailing that the Empire would combust if anything happened to Bob. Kale ignored the theatrics and insisted they needed access to the engine control corridors. Zeltrian reluctantly agreed and guided Kale through a restricted passage. The ship's underbelly was starkly different from its vibrant studio areas. It was dim, quiet, and filled with humming machinery. Kale examined the central data lines and quickly discovered the truth. The explosive failsafe was not a single device. It was part of a network of chain systems linked to emotional spikes throughout the ship. Vorkin had created a setup where any drop in broadcast intensity could trigger failure. It was political sabotage disguised as entertainment. While Kale inspected the wiring, Zeltrian nervously explained the reality of Vesmora politics. Ratings were everything. Leaders were chosen based on viewership and creativity. A single scandal, a dip in numbers, or a catastrophic broadcast could cause instantaneous downfall. Vorkin had always envied Zeltrian's popularity, and had waited for a weakness. Earth's unexpected involvement, and Bob's fame had given him the perfect opportunity. Kale considered the implications. Vorkin must have agents aboard the megaship, possibly even in disguise. As they reached the heart of the engine grid, Kale found evidence confirming his suspicion. A device was attached to the primary power artery, blending in but carrying Vorkin's distinctive energy signature. It siphoned control from Zeltrian's systems to a hidden terminal. This device was the real threat. But removing it required disconnecting several power nodes in a precise sequence. If done incorrectly, it would overload the grid and cause catastrophic failure. Before Kale could begin, the lights flickered violently. A tall figure stepped from the shadows. It was the same silhouette Kale had glimpsed before, now fully visible. This alien was tall, sharp-featured, and cloaked in dark energy patterns that pulsed with malicious intent. They identified themselves not with words but with a triumphant gesture, activating a chain of additional sabotage systems across the ship. Kale stepped protectively forward, instinctively shielding Zeltrian. The saboteur fled through an access tunnel, but Kale did not pursue. Time was running out. Instead, he focused on dismantling the device. Zeltrian hovered behind him, alternating between panicked. The studio's ship vibrated with tension the moment Kale returned from the engine grid. Aliens crowded around the screens, assistants scrambled through the aisles, drones hovered with frantic beeping, and the audience chat across the galaxy erupted with theories, rumors, and memes involving Kale's stoic expression and Bob's optimistic fear. Zeltrian paced with such dramatic intensity that he nearly tripped over his own cape twice. But none of this matched the sudden shift in the air when the entire broadcast froze, then resumed with a new figure filling every screen. Vorkin appeared at last, tall and silent, his angular frame wrapped in twisting shadows that flickered like living smoke. He stared directly at the camera with a gaze that pierced through lens and screen alike, then smiled with the brittle satisfaction of someone who believed he had already won. Vorkin spoke in a voice that rolled across the broadcast like cold metal scraping stone. He accused Zeltrian of incompetence, of relying on human novelty to salvage his ratings, of endangering the Empire with emotional chaos. With each accusation, Zeltrian wilted further, until he was kneeling dramatically behind Kale as though shielding himself with the human's calm aura. Vorkin then announced his challenge for control of the Empire's entertainment throne. He demanded a duel of broadcast supremacy, a final performance judged by the galactic audience. If Zeltrian won, he would retain his status. If Vorkin won, he would seize absolute control and, by implication, dispose of anyone who had defied him, including Kale and Bob. The rules were simple and terrifying. Each participant had to complete a set of live tasks designed in real time by the Empire's automated dramatic intelligence. Whoever generated more genuine audience engagement would win. Kale stepped forward before Zeltrian could crumble entirely. He accepted the challenge on Zeltrian's behalf, which shocked everyone. Zeltrian sputtered in confusion, but Kale placed a hand on his shoulder. He told him quietly that Zeltrian could not win this alone, but together they had a chance. The audience engagement spiked instantly, captivated by the unexpected alliance. Vorkan's eyes narrowed, but he agreed, confident that no human could outperform him on his own battlefield. The arena dissolved into a vast holographic landscape, shifting through environments as the artificial intelligence calibrated the duel. The first challenge materialized in an ancient ruin filled with pressure plates, rising platforms, and puzzles that clicked ominously with each passing second. Vorkin had the advantage of familiarity with Vesmora tech and stepped into the ruins with predatory grace. Kale entered calmly, studying the terrain with quiet focus. The countdown began. Vorkin leapt ahead, solving a pattern on the floor that opened a massive stone gate. The audience cheered. But Kale moved differently. He observed the hidden mechanisms beneath the tiles, found the overlooked structural flaw, and pressed a single cracked plate that caused the entire ruin to shift configuration in his favor. He completed the challenge with precision, while Vorkin snarled in frustration as his optimal route collapsed behind him. The audience erupted with laughter and awe. Kale had turned an obstacle into an advantage. The second challenge shifted into a zero-gravity chamber filled with floating crystals that emitted high-pitched tones. The task was to assemble a melody recognized by the Galactic Council as a peace anthem, but the crystals repelled each other violently. Vorkin attempted to force them together, using bursts of psychic energy to manipulate the melody, producing harsh clashing sounds that grated on the viewers. Kale, floating serenely through the air, listened carefully. Bob watched from a protected enclosure on a nearby platform, mouthing encouragement despite shaking visibly. Kale adjusted his movements, weaving between the crystals with graceful efficiency, tapping them gently into harmonic alignment. The melody formed beautifully, calming the chaotic audience and drawing massive engagement spikes. Even hostile viewers admitted the human had surprising finesse. Vorkin grew furious. He triggered his third challenge early, overriding the schedule. The arena transformed into a chaotic storm field where lightning crackled across swirling energy clouds. Drones swooped dangerously close, amplifying the drama. Zeltrian screamed something encouraging from the sidelines that sounded like an emotional breakdown wrapped in enthusiasm. Vorkin summoned his full power, shaping the storm around him in a spectacle of roaring darkness. But Kale, instead of competing in raw force, analyzed the environmental pattern. He realized the storm was programmable. He redirected lightning using metallic debris, grounding the energy into stable patterns. The storm calmed, coalescing into a gentle spiral. The audience was stunned. It was not dramatic, but it was profoundly impressive. A wave of admiration crashed across the broadcast. Vorkin, losing control, unleashed an unscheduled horror simulation as a desperate attempt to regain dominance. The arena darkened into a labyrinth of monstrous illusions designed to evoke fear-driven engagement. The creatures crawling through shadows were modeled specifically to unsettle viewers. Bob covered his eyes. Zeltrian clung to a support pillar like a distressed koala. But Kale remained still. He recognized illusions immediately, noticing how they distorted light or bent at unnatural angles. He walked calmly through them as if through fog, finding and overriding the projection source. The illusions shattered into harmless fragments. The audience reacted with awe, calling Kale fearless. Finally, the last challenge appeared. A moral dilemma scenario projected into a simulated collapsing hallway. 2 levers, 2 outcomes. One lever represented saving Zeltrian's broadcast legacy. The other represented ending the sabotage grid tied to Bob's cage. Only one could be pulled in time, according to the programmed rules. It was Vorkin's final ploy, a situation designed to break Kale publicly. The galaxy held its breath. Kale did not hesitate. He ignored both levers and ripped open the console beneath them, exposing the wiring. The entire scenario, designed to force an impossible choice, became irrelevant as he bypassed the system entirely. With a swift series of motions, he disabled the forced binary trap, saving both outcomes simultaneously. The viewers exploded into cheers so massive the ship lights overloaded in response. Vorkin stood frozen in disbelief. His final play had been undermined by simple human logic. In a desperate act, he lunged at Kale, attempting to force a dramatic physical confrontation. But Kale sidestepped, allowing Vorkin to collide with a drone that recorded the entire humiliation in perfect detail. The duel ended instantly. The galactic broadcast declared Kale and Zeltrian the winners by overwhelming margin. Vorkin's viewership plummeted so quickly the metric alarms howled. The megaship drifted through the quiet stretch of space like a glowing monument to chaos narrowly avoided. The duel had ended, Vorkin had been dragged away by Imperial guards, and the broadcast that nearly destroyed an empire was now being replayed endlessly across 1,000 star systems. The audience adored every second of it. Kale could not walk through the ship without being swarmed by drones capturing close-up shots of his expression, while aliens shouted requests for interviews, tutorials, and even signature problem-solving demonstrations. He ignored all of it, moving with the steady precision of someone who had no interest in celebrity, and far too much interest in ensuring everyone was still alive. Zeltrian, meanwhile, floated after him with the jittery excitement of a creature who had just survived professional annihilation and was now experiencing emotional whiplash. Bob had been freed completely from the glitter cage, and though he still jumped whenever a loud noise echoed through the halls, he now walked with a hesitant confidence. He had become an intergalactic icon by accident, and aliens greeted him with cheers, applause, and symbolic offerings such as glowing fruit, floating scarves, or small mechanical pets that wagged their antennae at him. Bob accepted everything with a mixture of humility and mild panic. Every time a drone pointed at his face, he waved nervously and apologized to someone who was not even there. The galaxy found it endearing. Kale sat with Bob in a quiet observation room overlooking a field of distant stars. For the first time since they had arrived, the cameras were not following them. Bob admitted softly that he was terrified of returning to Earth, afraid people would see him differently or expect him to be a hero. Cale reassured him that being seen differently was not always a burden. Sometimes it was a chance to choose what kind of person you wanted to be next. Bob nodded thoughtfully, clutching a cup of alien tea that glowed faintly with each sip. It was strangely calming. A few hours later, the Imperial Council summoned Cale and Zeltrian to a formal session. The chamber was a towering auditorium filled with representatives from across the Vesmora Empire, all radiating different colors, shapes, and emotions. A suspended platform carried Cale and Zeltrian into the center, where the council delivered its verdict. Vorkin was stripped of all authority and sentenced to creative rehabilitation, a punishment that involved hosting a public broadcast where he had to teach younglings how to manage disappointment. Zeltrian was restored to his position, though with new oversight and mandatory humility training to prevent him from endangering hostages for dramatic effect. Zeltrian accepted the ruling with exaggerated grace, placing a hand to his chest and promising to become a beacon of responsible showmanship. Then the council addressed Cale. They offered him a position as the Empire's master problem solver, a prestigious role that would grant him influence across systems and allow him to reshape intergalactic cooperation. The offer stunned the audience, and Zeltrian nearly fainted from jealousy. Even Bob gasped from the corner of the chamber, dropping his glowing teacup. Cale thanked the council politely but declined without hesitation. His place was not in the spotlight or in political structures. He needed to return home. Earth was flawed, chaotic, and constantly overwhelmed, but it was his responsibility. The council respected his decision and offered Earth a new diplomatic alliance instead, one built on cultural exchange and mutual protection. Cale accepted on Earth's behalf. When the official assembly ended, celebrations erupted across the megaship. Neon lights shifted into festive patterns, music echoed through the corridors, and aliens danced with movements that looked impossibly flexible. Bob found himself at the center of the festivities, being carried around by a group of joyful gelatin-based lifeforms who admired his kindness. Zeltrian performed a dramatic monologue about his rise, fall, and triumphant redemption, complete with interpretive cape twirling. Cale simply stood apart, observing everything with a calm satisfaction. For once, things had ended without catastrophe. Eventually, Cale gathered Bob and informed him that it was time to return to Earth. Bob hesitated, biting his lip. He confessed that while he loved Earth, he felt more understood here among aliens who valued honesty and gentle humor. Cale told him the choice was his to make. There was no obligation to return if his heart told him otherwise. Bob stood silently for a long time before smiling shyly. He wanted to stay. He had been offered a series of opportunities to host intergalactic cooking shows and become a self-help figure for being struggling with emotional turbulence. Bob joked that back home, no one appreciated his lasagna, but here, it could change lives. Cale supported the decision fully. Zeltrian nearly burst into sparkles from delight. He promised to take care of Bob and ensure his safety, though Cale warned him sternly that if anything happened to Bob, he would personally return to fix the problem permanently. Zeltrian nodded with such seriousness that his cape stopped fluttering. When the day of departure arrived, the megaship prepared a ceremonial send-off. Bob hugged Cale tightly, promising to use everything he had learned to help others. Zeltrian saluted Cale with dramatic intensity, already planning his next season based on peaceful interspecies collaboration. The shuttle doors closed, sealing Cale inside. As he looked through the window, he saw Bob waving with watery eyes and Zeltrian striking a pose for the drones. The shuttle detached smoothly, gliding away from the megaship. Cale settled into the seat, letting the silence of space surround him. Earth grew closer with each passing minute. His mission had begun with a hostage situation, spiraled into an interstellar crisis, and ended with unexpected alliances and renewed purpose. He felt no pride, only relief. Then, as the shuttle crossed into Earth's communication range, Cale's wrist device pinged with an incoming message. It was a notification from the Vesmora network. Someone had tagged him in a trending intergalactic meme. He tapped it reluctantly, and saw a looping clip of him sidestepping Vorkin during the duel, set to comedic music and surrounded by floating captions. It had over 1 billion views already. Kale closed the device and leaned back, covering his face with an exasperated hand. Somehow, despite everything, the galaxy had turned him into a meme. And he knew it was only the beginning.